Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Neve. If you have been here before, it's nice to see you again. I stuck to my word. I've made it back for another month. How exciting. Today's video is going to be my what I read in February, which I'm very excited about. Last month I said to you, listen, I read a lot this month. There's no way I'll top that in February. There's no way I'll even keep up with that in February. Both of those were lies. I did in fact keep up and I did in fact top it. I don't really understand how. But it does mean we have a lot to get through. So I'm going to try my best to not talk rubbish and just give you what you're here for, which is the book reviews. What you need to know about February is I took February is the month of love far too literally and read so many romance novels this month that I'm genuinely surprised they haven't all started to blur into one big romance tale. So if romance novels are not your thing, this might not be the video for you because it is about 80% like rom-com. Just a heads up. However, that is my ideal way to spend a month, so I've had a grand old time and I cannot wait to tell you about it. Last month, the last book I told you about, if I can remember correctly, was A Thief and a Gentleman by Arden Powell, and I had a great time with that. So I started February reading as many other Arden Powell novels as I could get my little hands on, starting with A Novel Arrangement. A Novel Arrangement was so fun. I will put the cover somewhere here so you can have a look. This is the first time I've ever read polyamory in a romance novel, and I had so much fun. It was also like ridiculous polyamory, like the concept of how they got from not polyamorous to polyamorous was ridiculously campy and convoluted, and it was great fun, and I loved that. I also really enjoyed, so like all of Arden Powell's novels have some form of secondary plotline that is like a little bit magical and a little bit like odd, I suppose. Like in A Thief and a Gentleman, one of them is a thief. And like in one of the other books that I'll talk about later, there's like a curse involved, and so that thing, all that stuff, which is always great fun. In this one, we have the protagonist Elizabeth, who is a seamstress, but she's also secretly the author of really pulpy romance novels that everyone loves and is desperate to find out who writes. And one day she gets a letter through her door that's like, by the way, I know who you are, and I'm going to tell everybody if you don't give me this money and do what I say, and yada yada yada. And obviously, poor Elizabeth panics because she doesn't want people to know her secret. So the kind of secondary plot of the book is that them trying to figure out who it is that's exposing her and why and how they can stop it, which is great fun. And what I particularly liked, like when you read it, is the person who's blackmailing her is like really bad at it. Like she knows someone's blackmailing her and she knows that she should be frightened, and she kind of is frightened, but also throughout the whole book she's like, wow, like whoever this is really terrible at this. Like they're really shit. Like these letters aren't scary and they're not being where they said they'd be, and this is ridiculous. And you're reading it, you're like, yeah, it kind of is actually. That's you think if you're going to take the risk to try and ruin someone's life, you would be slightly more efficient at it, but apparently not. So that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed the kind of like dynamic between Elizabeth and her husband and their friend Jules, and the kind of different relationships they all have, and the way they sort of like ebb and flow, and the path that leads them to where their relationship ends up is very different for each party and has different moments of realization and impact. And I really enjoyed that, and I liked that it didn't start with a love triangle. I know we always joke online, like if you're going to make us read a love triangle it should end in polyamory, which fair enough, but I liked that that wasn't the case here. It was more ridiculous than that, and I had a great time. And I just think Arden Powell's stuff is so fun. I'm a sucker for historical romance, and I like that all of the books in this series, the characters are all interconnected. So you get different little bits of each character throughout all of the books. You get to like revisit the people you've already read about and learn a little bit more about them. I really enjoy that. I like that they're all connected. I like that they all impact each other's storylines somehow. Great fun. I gave this one 3 stars. I think I gave all of these 3 stars actually, the Arden Powell ones, because they're so silly and they're so fun. I don't know if I can quite justify giving them any more than that, but I had such a good time reading them that, like, I do somehow still feel bad about 3, but I think I'm sticking with it. Okay, so making a sharp left turn from a novel arrangement, the next book I read in February was my book club book for February, which was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. The Handmaid's Tale is set in a sort of dystopian version of America whereby women have had all of their rights taken away and they exist within 3 main categories. You have the wives, you have the Marthas, and you have the handmaids. So the handmaids' only purpose in life is for reproduction. They get sent to a family where they live, and their only job is once a month, I believe. The husband of the family sleeps with, I mean, rapes them, but you know what I mean, in hopes of conceiving a child. And then if they're successful, they carry that child, birth that child, the husband and wife take that child, and they get repositioned with a new family. And it goes on. Women are not allowed to read. They have no rights, they have no votes, they have no pleasures, no luxuries, no vanities. Like, everything comes down to a woman's ability to reproduce. That's it. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely horrifically terrifying. I I thought that last month's book club book, American Psycho, would be the most uncomfortable I would be reading a book for book club this year. And then The Handmaid's Tale came along, and somehow it was so much worse. Because American Psycho is so violent, like gratuitously violent, but there's something so sinister about reading The Handmaid's Tale because every step of what happens that they explain to you just feels so easy to imagine happening now. Like, it's almost like you're reading something, it's almost like you're reading something that you know you're on the cusp of experiencing, which is horrific. It's so scary. I really love the way it's written. I love that it's written through, it's almost like a confessional. It's like someone who is trying to tell you their story before they can never tell the story ever again. And Alfred, the narrator and the protagonist, willingly admits that her stories are unreliable and that she's altering details, and then she'll tell you she's altered them, but sometimes she won't. And it made it feel so much more real and therefore so much more horrifying, but also felt very true of the way our bodies hold on to the trauma that we experience and the way our brain tries to protect us from that, and how unreliable our memory can be in the face of trauma and extremism, because there comes a point where you just can't accept anything more than what you've already accepted inside your head. Yeah, brilliant. Horrifying though, so horrifying. We had book club yesterday actually, and like all of us kind of just sat there and we're like, yeah, it's not. I think one of the questions that my friend Freya, who picked the book, asked was how similar does it feel, like what similarities can you draw, and like the answer was so, like, it's terrifying. And I think what's actually scarier about reading it is that in some ways it feels more similar to our life now than it did when it was written. Like, it feels like we're actively moving towards the dystopia that when it was written would have seemed somewhat ridiculous. Like, to have the hindsight to know that when that was written it should have seemed almost inconceivable, and now it doesn't seem inconceivable at all. In fact, I actually seen I don't know if it was a TikTok or I don't know where I seen it, somewhere online, of a woman saying that her friend is an English teacher and she won't teach The Handmaid's Tale, not because she's worried about the backlash or like it getting banned or anything like that, but that she's worried if she teaches young people The Handmaid's Tale, someone will use it as inspiration because that's the world that we live in. And I don't know about you guys, that's horrifying. Like that's scary. That really spooked me when I read that. I was like, that's not okay. Like, but I think she might be right. Like I think we live in a world where there are young men who could use that for ideas instead of as a warning. That is horrific. In fact, I actually don't know how much I even want to say anymore because the more I talk about it and the more I think about it, the spookier it feels because it just hit uncomfortably close to home. And I think as well when you read it and there's a bit where they explain how in some ways getting to where they were now as a society happened very slowly, but also it happened all at once. And it was like within one day the credit cards were shut, the women lost their jobs, the you know, the guards appeared. What struck me actually was like Offred explaining how compliant everybody was because in the face of what you perceive as national emergency, you trust your government to keep you safe and you do as you're told. And then you get stuck. And it happens so quickly. And I really sat and thought to myself, like, if I woke up tomorrow and all of a sudden I couldn't work anymore and I couldn't, I didn't have my own money anymore and the government was saying, don't leave your house, there's a war on, you're in danger, would I know enough to know that I was being lied to? And I can't answer that question. And that's really scary. Absolutely harrowing read it was. I read it really quickly, and I don't know if that was a better or worse way to go about it. I don't know if I should have dragged it out a bit and given myself a breather in between, or it was better to read the way I read it, but beautifully written, horribly impactful. So yeah, that was a really fun month for book club. We've had two absolute gut punches in a row, and I am happy to report that March's book club seems to bring with it some joy and whimsy again, which I can safely say on all of our behalfs we're quite grateful for. So you'll have to wait till next month's video to hear about that. But we've broken the streak of trauma, thank God, before my brain started melting out of my ears with just fear. But yeah, I hadn't prepared myself for how much it would feel like something in my peripheral vision instead of 40 miles away. Whew. Anyway, on to slightly lighter note. We're going back to Arden Powell because I read Of Socialites and Prize Fights next. And I love this one. I love this one. Of Socialites and Prize Fights is butch femme historical romance. It was so good. It was so much fun. So it follows Deepa, who is a performer at what appears to be like a cabaret bar, and she she like dates men for money, and like she has all these patrons that come to the cabaret bar and like buy her all these lovely things and help pay her rent because she's gorgeous. It's very quickly established she is one drop dead gorgeous lady. She's stunning, and she has all these clothes that are like enchanted with all these like good luck charms and allurements, and you can't, if Deepa's in a room, that's who you're looking at, you're not looking anywhere else. And she is desperate to earn enough money to provide her and her mother a better life. And she meets this patron at the club and she turns him down. And this man gets a little bit evil about it and he curses her. And he's like, you can only break the curse with true love's kiss or whatever. And she's like, well, that doesn't exist. So what if I just killed you instead? Which she doesn't. But, you know, to be honest, that's kind of a girl boss move. Like, I also don't know if I could be bothered trying to go and find my true love in the middle of 1920s London. Part of me would also probably be like, yeah, but what if you just died? Would that be faster? Because, you know, I've got stuff to do, to be honest. But she's like, oh God, like, I'm never going to find my true love because men suck and I hate them. And her two best friends, Ali and Jasmine, who are in a happy lesbian relationship, are like, come to this gay bar with us and we'll find you a woman. And Deepa's like, that's not going to work. I don't like women. And they're like, well, just come anyway. So she goes and she meets this woman called Roz, who is a little bit older than her, butch lesbian, who is a mechanic by day and a boxer by night. And Deepa's like, okay, maybe I like women just a little bit, just a smidge. And they start, you know, having their fun. Whilst Deepa tries really, really hard to break this curse. I really like this one, guys. I am a sucker for butch femme relationships. I love butch femme relationships. My one of my best friends, Gemma, who I know is watching this, is the biggest butch femme combination fan I have literally ever met in my life. And the whole time I read this book, I was thinking of her. I texted her about it like 3 times. Um, and I told her I was going to send it to her when I was done reading it so she could read it. And then I decided I was going to wait until I made this because I knew she would watch it. Uh, but yeah, I think she'll have the best time reading this because I had the best time reading this. Actually, what more could you ask for than a historical rom com, but it's lesbians and one of them is a butch lesbian? I don't think you can ask for much more than that, if I'm being honest. It was great fun. The conflict in this one was a little bit more interesting because I think I said the last time that I quite enjoyed how, like, very, very rarely in these books is the character who is a little bit more fucked up the one that's made to change their behavior. And that trend did stick in this one, but there was a lot more tension regarding it than there usually was. And I quite enjoyed that. Like, this idea of, like, you can want to be with someone like as much as you possibly can, but if in the at the end of the day your like fundamental goals and beliefs are different, like how do you make that work? Something has to give. And I quite enjoyed the way that tension kind of unfolded throughout the novel and the way they kind of struggled to reach that compromise, not necessarily with each other, uh, but particularly in Deepa's case with herself and having to. Oh, it's dark.
I tell you what, Sherlock Holmes, you are unbelievable.
We're back in the game, I think. So let's keep going before something else breaks. I seem to be having terrible technical luck this time back round. Anyway, as I was saying, particularly in Deepa's case, she had to kind of have a look within herself and ask herself whether or not her goals were something she could compromise on. And yeah, it was great fun. I think this one might be one of my favorites in the series. I had so much fun. Also, the fact that they created this very sweet butch lady and then just made her really good with her hands was spectacular. They were like, yep, she fixes cars, also she punches people. She does all of the things with her hands very competently. Great fun. Highly recommend. That's all I've got to say on that. Um, the next book that I read this month was another historical romance. You might be beginning to see I have a theme. I have a bias, okay? And that was One Indulgence by Lydia Gastrell. This I read as an ebook, so I will put the cover here again as well. Now, One Indulgence follows a man called Henry who is very high up in the upper echelons of Regency London society, but has spent his whole life living out with London. And he has just inherited his title and has been informed that before his father died, he's set up an arranged marriage for him. So he knows he now has to spend, the is it the winter or the summer they spend in the town? I don't know. That's really bad. I probably should know that. And go through the season and court this young lady and marry her. One problem: he's really gay. It's really gay. So he decides he is going to allow himself one night to indulge in his nature and then never again. He's going to marry this young lady. He's going to do his best to be a good husband, and he will have had this one night to carry him through the rest of his life. So he goes to a brothel, but he says to the lady, "Listen, I don't want to hire someone to do this. That's a step too far for me. So, can you do me a favor? The next time a guy comes in here who is looking to hire someone, can you just ask him if he fancies changing his mind and coming up and sleeping with me instead?" And the woman who runs the brothel is kind of like, "You're nuts, but yeah, okay, whatever, I'll ask." In comes Lord Richard Avery, who is also gay. And he gets in a fight with this guy that he has, like, for lack of a better word, some sort of like situationship with, and it doesn't seem to be going very well. And stomps off to the brothel to lick his wounds or whatever, and ends up agreeing to this proposal to spend the night with this mysterious gentleman. And they have one night of, you know, passion or whatever, and go their separate ways. However, again, another fun little fork in the wheel is that it turns out that the arranged marriage that Henry has had set up for him is actually to Lord Richard Avery's sister. Which, as you can imagine, Richard not too pleased about. He's not loving that because he's a little bit obsessed with this mysterious man that he had one night with and doesn't really want to spend the rest of his life with that man as his brother. So the book kind of follows the absolute clusterfuck that whole situation is. What interested me about this is when I read, like, it's particularly like Regency esque romances, I tend to find myself leaning towards the ridiculous and the ones that are like almost in this like utopia style version of Regency Britain where everybody seems to be gay and it seems to be relatively easy to be gay considering the time period. Um, like there's a bit of wiggle room there. This one was less like that. You very much were aware as you were reading it of the world they lived in and the risk that they were taking in being queer and having any form of relationship and fighting for said relationship and the sort of restraint that a relationship like that would be under for the rest of their lives. And that was really interesting because it was tonally different from the romances that I read majority of the time. So the stakes did feel higher in some ways because you were very aware that every decision these characters were making, they were making at great risk to both themselves and to each other, which I quite liked. And it was a very interesting look into the kind of shame a man might feel at that time and the pressure because, like, let's be honest, their whole lives revolve around marriage and the socio-economic, like, nuances of those marriages and the power imbalances that exist within the town and yada yada yada, which was very much a part of this. And it was interesting to have the kind of weight of that in the background. I quite enjoyed it. Did I enjoy it as much as Arden Powell's nonsensical fantasy romances? No, because I'm a sucker for things that are a little bit camp. But I had fun. I enjoyed it. I I liked that the characters were nuanced, particularly Henry. Like, has some skeletons in his closet of behavior that he isn't proud of that really comes back to bite him. But you also see a very naive and very vulnerable side to him also, and I enjoyed seeing the contrast of those two things and the way that they interacted with each other in different circumstances. Um, I think where the issue lay for me in this was that by nature of all of those things, of the shame and of the need for secrecy and the need for discretion and the fear, like these characters were putting so much on the line to fight for each other or not fight for each other or, whatever. And it all felt a bit much to be doing for a man that you've literally met once. And the whole like we've just met but you're the love of my life thing is like I can get behind that when the stakes don't feel so high. But there is something about that I was very aware of when I was like reading this, and I'm like, you're taking some pretty big risks for this man. You're getting really bothered by this, and you've known each other for 3 days. Just a thought. Just a thought. But do you know what? I had a good time. I read it really quickly, and I then did go on and read the next book in the series. So, my complaints have minimal standing on whether or not I will continue to read Lydia Gastriel's work. It was just, I think, tonally a bit of a shift for me within the genre, which is good. It's good to change it up a bit, but I think I think I like an element of the ridiculous. I can't lie. On the topic of things that slightly have the element of the ridiculous in them, we're going back to a favorite of mine. As I said in the last video, you're beginning to really see a theme that I might never escape from. The next book I read was The Duke at Hazard by KJ Charles. I will read you the blurb instead of trying to summarize myself because I think I give too much away when I try and explain the books to you. Like, I think sometimes I edit this and I'm like telling you guys about a book I read, and I think, well, there's no need for any of you to read it now because I've given the game away. I don't know when to shut up, so I'll read this. The Duke of Severn is one of the greatest men in Britain. He's also short, quiet, and unimpressive, and now he's been robbed after indulging in one rash night with a strange man who stole the heirloom Severn ring from his finger. The Duke has to get it back, and he can't let anyone know how he lost it. So when his cousin bets that he couldn't survive without his privilege and title, the Duke grasps at the opportunity to hunt down his ring, incognito. Life as an ordinary person is terrifying until the anonymous Duke meets Basil Charnage, a disgraced gentleman, and hires him to help. Racing across the country in search of the thief, the Duke and Basil fall into scrapes, into trouble, and in love. Basil has been excluded from polite society, his name tainted by his father's crimes and his own misbehaviour. Now he dares to dream of a life somewhere out of sight with the quiet gentleman who's stolen his heart. He doesn't know that his lover is a hugely rich public figure with half a dozen titles, and when he finds out, it will risk everything they have. There you go. I like this one. This one is, I don't know if any of you guys will have read Something Fabulous by Alexis Hall, but it has a sort of similar vibe. It's a bit like a car chase type situation, like they're racing all across England trying to hunt down this man. It's very much all those like there's only one bed in the inn, and um you know I'm hiding who I really am, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's so much fun though. I had a great time. There was like a good balance in this of just like absolute just ridiculous, just nonsense, off the walls. There's no way that could happen. Campy fun. And like a bit of like, the character's backstories had a bit of weight, particularly Dazel, who is he's kind of a bit at rock bottom, and he's had a hard life. He's had a bad set of cards dealt to him in the past couple of years, and is really struggling to find his feet and find a life for himself now that he has been outcast from polite society. And their relationship was very sweet, and it was very much that idea of like that kind of being accepted as you are thing instead of being accepted for doing what you're told or doing what's expected of you. And it was lovely. The last little bit of this book does get a bit ridiculous. Like it's really, it gets a bit this scene at the end of what is that film, the Cameron Diaz film? Is it The Other Woman, where she finds out that her boyfriend is married, and then they find out that he has another girlfriend? And like at the end of that book where they trap him in the boardroom and they're like, "We've caught you," and it just gets like absurd, and he hits his head and he's blue, like that whole thing. The end of this a little bit feels like that, but I kind of love that. Like I had a great time. I love KJ Charles. I like this genre that she exists within, and I feel no shame for that. So yeah, The Duke at Hazard by KJ Charles, massive romp, great fun. I think I gave this one 3.5 or 3.75 stars. It's just my cup of tea, to be honest. I think that's the only justification I can give for that. It's a bit of me. It's a bit of me. The next book I read in February, we're going back to Lydia Gastriel, which was One Glimpse, which is the second book in this series. There currently is only two. I don't know if there will be more in the future. If there is, I will probably read them, but at current there's only two. So we have One Indulgence and we have One Glimpse. One Glimpse follows a man called Samuel Shaw, who seems like a bit of a curmudgeon. We meet him in the first one. He kind of sucks in the first one, but he also like there's something there that makes you feel like you've slightly misinterpreted, or maybe you don't know. And then you read this one and you go, yeah, he's a bit of a sorry soul, to be honest. He doesn't love socializing. He's got a bit of a temper. He is under the impression he's wildly unremarkable, and he seems to be quite a soft soul at the root of him, which is very much not what a man is meant to be. He's also gay. And he one night takes himself off to the brothel. It was the only way back then. And as he's leaving, a door in the brothel opens and a man comes out. And it's one of the other gentlemen of the town, who is kind of known as the dandy of the town, and very much seems like a womanizer. He has a very famous mistress, and the last person in the world that Samuel would expect to also be a gay man. And by discovering this about John Darnish, they end up in this like unexpected friendship, which causes some real issues for them, because lots of people in the town don't like that they're friends now, because a lot of people don't like Samuel because he's not got many friends, let's put it that way. This one was much more, what's the word, I don't know what the word I'm trying to find is. Like the stakes in this one were very much about people cannot find out about this. Like people cannot know about this. If people find out about this, it'll be terrible. And there was a lot more emphasis put on the lengths that you might go to hide it. And the central conflict ended up being that people did find out, and that they started causing problems for Samuel and John when they knew that information, and the things that they might do with that information and the consequences that might have. And it was done fine. Like my problem is not that it was handled badly. The problem is that personally, if I'm reading a romance novel, like I don't want to read something that has that level of scary homophobia in it. You know, like there's enough fiction for me that is about homophobia that I can choose to read and know that's what I'm getting into. That personally, when I'm reading my Regency romance novels, it's not what I am looking for. However, I really, really liked Shaw and Darnish as a couple. They were very sweet. They seemed to really have so much grace for each other and understanding for each other. And I did like that the kind of central conflict wasn't them like lashing out at each other because of their fear, or it wasn't one of those like, you know, miscommunication tropes or anything like that. Like I liked that it was an outside influence bringing in the conflict, and I liked them as a couple. I liked how immediately Darnish put his foot down in terms of Samuel's reputation and stuck his neck out and defended him and was like immediately so loyal. And they were very gentle with each other, very soft with each other. It was a relationship that I believed in, even though they also hadn't known each other for that long. Like I was saying about the first one, like I could foresee this being a relationship that came to something and meant something, and I understood why they were committing themselves to it more so perhaps than I did with Henry and Richard. Although you see quite a lot of Henry and Richard in this one because Samuel and Henry have got a bit of a backstory, which further complicates things. And I did quite enjoy the kind of narrative arc of that too. And I liked that it was a little bit messy and they didn't like sweep it away and clean it up really quickly. Um it had a good focus on kind of like the lingering hurt and what actually is forgiveness, and you know what that kind of shame does to a person and the behavior that it brings out in you, and how a lot of the time actually the people that suffer from that are the people who are just like you, who are also under that fear and under that shame, and you then inflict your own, you know, internalized homophobia and your shame on them, and it doubles theirs, and like how that's what people want in the end, the people who are want you to feel ashamed in the first place. So I thought all of that was very interesting. And I always find that very interesting. It's why one of my favorite, you know, pieces of media ever is The Boys in the Band. My only complaint is on a personal level when I'm reading a romance novel. I don't love when the main conflict of that is homophobia. So that's my only real complaint, is that I do wish it wasn't like a, oh, we're gonna out you and you're gonna hang thing, because it's not very joyful or whimsical, is it? And if I'm reading, you know, Regency romance on my e-reader, I would like there to be joy and whimsy. It's escapism for me. But that'll be some people's cup of tea. Some people will like that about the book. So that's not necessarily me having a complaint about the way the book is written, just a complaint about my personal tastes. I've just talked so much rubbish. Anyway, the next book I read in February, sticking with the kind of romancy type thing, we went for a cult classic. And it was very well timed because the next book that I read was Bridget Jones' Diary by Helen Fielding. Now, I went to see the new Bridget Jones in the cinema right after it came out. Me and my best friend went to the cinema to see it. Oh my god. I cannot actually explain to you how hard I cried at that film. Ridiculous, evil, cruel. I was in bits. Like from the get-go. Like I was like, okay, yeah, like people are saying it's sad, so I'll probably cry because I cry at everything. But I had not anticipated crying within the first like 3 minutes of the film. That was me already gone. My best friend also cried, which made me feel better she doesn't cry as often as I do. Like, I cry at everything, so it's entirely possible if I cry at a film that it's not the film, it's just I'm ridiculous. But she cried too, so I felt a bit better that it was like, a real thing that people were, generally speaking, people were crying. Honest to God, I left the cinema feeling like somebody punched me. It was so tender and bittersweet, and anything about grief always gets you, doesn't it? Like, but it was such a beautiful portrayal of grief, and it was so focused on love instead of on suffering. And it had these moments of like real brightness and tenderness and light and recovery, and then you had, the kind of reminder of the way grief pushes its way into your life. And I'm a real sucker for things that are bittersweet. They always take me out at my knees, and there were so many moments in that film that were bittersweet, and they took me out at the knees. All that to say, I came home from the cinema and decided it was finally time to read the books. So I read the first one. Listen, I don't know where you guys are watching this from, but if you're watching this from the UK, I am going to assume that you are familiar with British icon Bridget Jones. The films are so famous here, the books are so famous here. It was so much fun. Like, it was interesting as well because the films are such a cult classic, to see what they kept and what they didn't keep from the books. I really enjoyed this though. I liked that sort of like diary style writing. It's very informal. It makes you feel like you're like one of her closest friends. And I think things that are so explicitly from your direct perspective, like things that are written in diary format, or like, it's the same with American Psycho. It's always very interesting when they adapt it for film, because it's very, very hard to make you feel like you're that far in someone's head on film as it is in a book, I think, because you're watching them do it on the screen. So there's immediately that sort of like separation. Whereas when you're reading it, I don't necessarily think that that separation is so what's the word, like implicit. It's easier to pretend that you're in it. So that was really fun and interesting, and I loved how, after reading the book, how true to tone the book the films felt. Like, her voice and her presence is so similar across them, which is great fun. Listen, it's obviously very of its time, right? You know, would a book about a woman who is that obscenely obsessed with how much she weighs and how much she smokes and how much she drinks and men work now? I don't think so. Like, I don't think you could publish a book where every single chapter starts with the weight of the main character and how much of a difference that is from the weight the last time she wrote in her diary. You kind of there are bits you learn to skim, basically, is what I'm saying. But it is so quintessential of what life like was like here. Like, if you even remember, like, the things that we put on the TV in the early 2000s in Britain, crazy, crazy business we had kicking about on the TV here up until about 10 years ago. Um, and it fits in that, it fits in that time quite comfortably. And some of it's so funny and some of it's so sweet. And you can really feel, like, so vividly that horrible pressure that women have put on them to just like hurry up and get married, and like how your use starts and ends at whether or not you find someone to love you, and all of that kind of horrible misogyny pressure. And it is communicated so effectively, but in a way that is light enough that you digest it without it being hard to swallow. And I really liked that. Actually, wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, because I mostly read queer romance if I'm reading romance. but it's Bridget Jones. Everybody loves about Bridget Jones, and I, no exception. This is where it gets interesting. This is where it gets really interesting, actually. One thing you have to know about me, I'm leaning in, it's getting deep. One thing you have to know about me is when I was 15 years old, I read a book series that ruined my life and the lives of my immediate loved ones for about 2.5 years. And kind of about the time I started working, I managed to let them go. And they kind of, you know, they were out of sight, but there was a little part of them in my heart. And you know, when you have had like a full blown hyperfixation that's become a special interest, if you're neurodivergent like I am, and sometimes as it starts to fade slightly, the rose tinted glasses come off and you can start to kind of see the some of the more logical discussion points about something. And I kind of got to that point and I was like, this is great. And I blah, 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 my life. Last year, story time. Last year, October, November time, I was on Hinge, as you do. And I was talking to someone on Hinge who had a reference to these books on their profile, and I was like, that is nuts. I've not heard another person in real life mention these books ever. And they were like, oh yeah, have you read the new one? What? I was like, what do you mean, have I read the new one? There's not a new one, there's three. They were like, no, there's a new one, it came out this year. Hold on a minute. Read it that night, 3 hours, sat down, didn't move, finished the book. I took a deep breath and I asked myself, can I afford at this moment in my life for this to take over my life again? And the answer was no. So through willpower I genuinely did not know I possessed, I closed the book, or I turned off the book app on my phone, and I said, I can't do this right now. And I did not let myself ponder it much further because the Christmas rush was coming at work and that I had to prioritize that. So I went about my life. A week ago, the second new book came out. And I thought, do you know what? I read the first new book and I kept my sanity. I think I can do this. Do you know what I'm gonna do though? I'm going to read the original trilogy first, just to refresh my memory. And I'll reread the other one that came out last year first, and then we'll read this new one, and I'll be really fresh and ready to go, and then I'll move on. World's Biggest Liar Award goes to me, because what has instead happened is I've started rereading the original trilogy, which I'm about to tell you about, and it has taken over my brain. And it's the only thing I've thought about, or talked about, or looked at online, or read, or, anything for a week. So, my loved ones are having a great time, thanks for asking. And yeah, I'm going to tell you about them. I have to, however, morally caveat this with, do not read these books without looking into the trigger warnings first, because they are absolutely wild. Like, there's just so much trauma that I don't want to be responsible for inflicting on other people without a warning. So just keep that in mind. This is like my version of talking about A Little Life. I'm never going to read A Little Life, so you'll never have to listen to my review of A Little Life. This is my version of that. Go in informed, don't go in blind, okay? The trigger warning list for this series looks like the side effect list on a packet of birth control, you know? So just like prep yourself. Anyway, today we're here to talk about the All for the Game trilogy by Nora Sakovic. So in February, I'm gonna double them up. I've read two in February. The other one I finished today, which is it's the 2nd of March. So I'm so angry that I didn't get them all done in February because it feels illegal to talk about them separately, but it's what we're gonna have to do. So the first two we have the Foxhole Court. This is how you know it's really bad. The hyperfixation has set in so bad. Is I am looking at myself in the viewfinder right now, holding these books, and I just got just got butterflies. I got so excited to just see the books in my hand. It's not a good sign. Anyway, we have The Foxhole Court by Nora Sakovic, which is book one, and then we have The Raven King by Nora Sakovic, which is book two. So, I'm going to read you the blurbs. I'm going to try and tell you as little as possible about the actual plot because there's no good start or stop point for that. So, Neil Jostin is the newest addition to the Palmetto State University XC team. He's short, he's fast, he's got a ton of potential, and he's the runaway son of the murderous crime lord known as the Butcher. Signing a contract with the PSU Foxes is the last thing a guy like Neil should do. The team is high profile, and he doesn't need sports crews broadcasting pictures of his face around the nation. His lies will only hold up so long under this kind of scrutiny, and the truth will get him killed. But Neil's not the only one with secrets on the team. One of Neil's new teammates is a friend from his old life, and Neil can't walk away from him a second time. Neil has survived the last 8 years by running. Maybe he's finally found someone and something worth fighting for. I'll read you the blurb of the second one to you before we start talking. The Foxes are a fractured mess, but their latest disaster might be the miracle they've always needed to come together as a team. Sorry, you've not read the book. That is an absurd way to blurb the context of what that blurb references. Nuts thing to word like that in a blurb. Not the point. The one person standing in their way is Andrew, and the only one who can break through his personal barriers is Neil. Except Andrew doesn't give up anything for free, and Neil is terrible at trusting anyone but himself. The two don't have much time to come to terms with their situation before outside forces start tearing them apart. Rico is intent on destroying Neil's fragile new life, and the Foxes have just become collateral damage. Neil's days are numbered, but he's learning the hard way to go down fighting for what he believes in, and Neil believes in Andrew, even if Andrew won't believe in himself. Okay, so I love these books. They're so fascinating. They're horrific in terms of like they're so traumatic and they're so violent and they're so of the time that they were written. Like I haven't read these books in about 5 years, and there were a couple lines as I was reading these that I was like, oh, wow. I wouldn't have put that in there. That 15-year-old me didn't quite have the capacity to look too far into. However, there is so much hope in these books, even when all evidence points to the fact that there should be none. Like, there is something about having this cast of characters who are so vulnerable and have been let down so many times, who are just determined to break out of the circumstances that they've been handed and to be spearheaded by a man who will make it his life mission to give these people as many chances as he can possibly give them to break the cycle that they have been unwillingly thrust into. And it just gets you right in the chest. So it does. There's just so much hope in the book, and there is so much about second chances and about forgiveness and about being more than what people are going to tell you that you are, and getting yourself out of a situation that you didn't get yourself into, and found family, and learning what safety means, and Like it's just all of those things. It's like that the same thing. Like I don't know if any of you guys have ever read the Raven Boys, the Raven Cycle like series, but it's that idea of like the families, people that you choose, and all of that kind of thing. And I love them. I love them so much. Again, caveat: this is not me advising you read them willy nilly. Look after yourself because there's some really, really heavy stuff in these books. The first one is is does. The second one is really tough. So just like please bear that in mind. Read up on the trigger warnings. Because the first time I read the second one, like I actually had to stop in the middle at one point because I thought I was going to be sick. It's tough. It's heart wrenching. It's brutal. Nora Sakovic puts these characters through things that you just never want to have to read happen on a page, if I'm being honest. And I'm not unaware of that. And there are so many very, very valid criticisms of these books that I am in no way trying to undercut or undermine. I am aware that there are problems with these books, and many of them. But I think part of it is a nostalgia thing for the relationship I had with them as a teenager. Part of them is a neurodivergency thing. The claws are sunk in and they're not letting go. The other part is the kind of general message and stuff that I was mentioning before just speaks to me. I can't lie, and there is something I find them very very emotional, and they're very hard to put down once you've picked them up, and the characters really worm their way into your heart even when they shouldn't because they all are kind of really interestingly morally screwed up individuals. But yeah, big fan, for better or for worse. Big fan. I have kind of lost my mind. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I have bought myself a Foxes jersey already. I finished the first book on Thursday. It's Sunday. The fixation is taking hold real fast. I also bought myself if you don't know this about me, actually, before say this because it will sound nuts either way. As a teenager, I was a cosplayer. That was my main hobby. I very much miss it as an adult, but it's very hard to find the time. But the one problem I always had when I was cosplaying was I could never find a good wig for my Andrew cosplay. They evaded me, they fought me. It was a nightmare. I think I find it though, and I ordered myself an Andrew wig tonight. So if my cosplay return coincides with the YouTube return, first of all, magic. Second of all, it's these books' fault. They're taking the fall for that, not me. So yeah, if you see me on my other socials in a blonde wig, mind your business. I'm fulfilling a childhood dream. I finally found a wig. So listen, can't be helped, can it? It can't be helped. I am still reading the book I told you guys about last month about the AIDS crisis, but I've been dipping in and out of it, like I said before, in like shorter bursts because otherwise I just forget all the names that they're telling me, and it seems important to try and remember as many of those names as possible to be able to follow along with the timeline. I hope to finish it next month because I'm really enjoying it, but I just don't want to overdo it and then detract from the point of what reading it was. So hopefully that'll come up in March's wrap up and I can talk about that in a little bit more depth. Thank you so much for watching. That is all I have for you today. It's always a joy to have you here. I've had a rare tear myself. I will see you next month for March's roundup, if not before. Lots of love. See you later.